Hey guys, welcome back to my C++ for Python developers video series. Before we start, I would like to say I decided I'm not going to film myself anymore because that makes this shit way harder to edit, really makes it not any fun for me, and the likelihood of this series continuing on is going to be based on me finding this fun and people actually watching it. So instead, I decided I'm going to go ahead and focus on content and less on, you getting to see me getting to see you, because none of that shit matters. So anyway, in this video, we're going to go over some of the basic types in C++ and also the basics of functions. All right, so some of the types we're going to talk about are ints, floats, bools, strings, characters, things like that. In Python, even though it's dynamically typed, there's still types, right? You still have an int, a float, bool. I mean, you get the point. They're still there, okay? The equivalent of those in C++ are here. So an integer in Python is the same in C++. The float in Python is equivalent to a double in C++. So before going forward, I want to say there is something called a float inside of C++, but it's different. So what it is typically when people talk about floats and doubles, they're both floating point values. The difference is a float is usually 32-bit while a double is 64-bit. Now in Python, the float is actually 64-bit on most systems, and that's why the equivalent is a double in C++, not a float. Bool's the same. The only difference is that it's lowercase instead of uppercase. And then for strings, there is a type in the standard template library, or in the standard library, for a string. We'll cover that later. But for now, a string in C++ and C is going to be a const char pointer. Now I'll explain what all this is in a later video when we talk about pointers and arrays and const. But for now, just consider this the same thing as a string in Python. And then there's also something called a char. Now, the reason I show this, even though there's no equivalent in Python, is that in Python, there is no difference in whether or not you use single quotes or double quotes. They're the same thing. In C++, that's not the case. If you were talking about a character, a single character, you have to use single quotes. If you're talking about a string, you have to use double quotes. And that's really the big difference there. Now the fun stuff. Let's get into functions. So in Python, if I wanted to create a function for adding two numbers together, I could do something like this. A plus B. All right, and let's go ahead and what we're going to do is print that. Actually, let's do this. C equals sum of 2 and 3. And we can print C. Okay. Now in C++, here's what we're going to do. To create a function that looks a little bit different, we are going to do and to do the same thing. And actually, I'm not going to print these. I'm sure you can trust my arithmetic is correct when I tell you what these return. So what we'll do is do 2, 3, and gotta say the type. Okay, so let's talk about some of these differences. In Python, you don't have to declare what type it's returning, right? Or that it's even returning anything at all. You just define a function, give it its name, its arguments, and that's it. You can either return something or not. If you don't, it implicitly returns none. Now in C++ and most statically typed languages, this is a little different. When you create a function, not only do you have to declare what the types are for the arguments, you have to actually declare a return type. If there is none, you use void. So let's see. All right, so other than that, that's the equivalent there. Now, they do have type hinting in some of the newer versions of Python where you can kind of do the same thing, something like this, which is pretty nice if you're coming from a statically typed language. It is very nice, but most people don't do it. But that's kind of the same thing there. Now, something else that's a little bit different in in C++ is in the same way you can split up declaration and definition of a variable, you can do the same exact thing with a function. What you can do is this. So, and this would work. Here you're declaring that, hey, there's a function out there called sum that takes in 2 arguments that are of type ints and returns an int. And then later on, you can actually do the definition of the function. So one difference that did not cover that we will in a later video is how these arguments are passed. In Python, everything is passed by passed by reference. In C++, by default, it's passed by value, and you can actually change whether you want it to be passed by reference, by pointer, etc. But we'll cover that when we actually go over what references and pointers and things like that are, which will be in not too many videos from now. So if you liked this video, please leave me a like, and I will see you next time.